years, for over 10 years now. He also lectures, you're lecturing at, you're at ANU as well.
I'm at ANU at the moment, yes. It's something called the Tech Launcher program.
Yeah, so he's doing that. So, and has been doing this for many years. So please join me in welcoming Richard.
Oh, look at that. Wow. Oh, that's a shame. Hang on a sec, this thing wants to slide a little bit. We'll see how it goes. Try this thing here. See if it'll go backwards. There we go. That's my opening slide. One of them is now 13. The only decent picture I've taken in my entire life. So, I'm just gonna have to keep an eye on it. Okay. I could usually spend the half hour debunking most of what David said. But, that's not why I came. I talked to DAMA about 4 years ago on ethics and professionalism. And back 4 years ago, this AI stuff kind of really wasn't on the radar much. It's kind of exploded a lot. And I'll talk a lot about those kinds of things as we go along. But the back end of my talk, I'm going to be focusing on what the so-called algorithm story. Right? Because frankly, in my view, AI doesn't exist. Because the intelligence part doesn't exist. Right? We use, IT is famous for swiping terms from other people. Right? They borrow phrases and terms from everybody. They have no shame and no imagination. Right? They're not worms. They're not viruses. Right? But I digress. So if some of you have been to a few of my talks, you know that there's a quiz. There's always a quiz, right? So this is the first one. Who said this? Any guesses about who? And they're all famous people, right? Even some IT famous people. Right? You keeping score? When he came up, when he realized the consequences of his famous formula, he had a serious rethink and thought, damn, maybe I shouldn't have told anybody. And then he spent the rest of his life working on peace and those kinds of issues. So, what I'm not going to talk about today is regulation and laws, because the regulation and laws have nothing to do with ethics. Some of them claim that they're based on ethics, but a lot of them, let me see. In the early 20th century, the Americans, I'm Canadian by the way, so I get to, and I will mercilessly bag out Americans as we go along. The American Congress passed a law, and none of the senators or congressmen really understood what the law was for until the original Rockefeller died. And then it turned out that that law specifically excluded his estate from anything anybody wanted to take away. Oh, cool. Oh, that'll yeah, that'll probably work. Yeah. High technology there. Right? So, the laws are not part of the conversation. Protection is not part of the conversation. I mean, protection is a good thing in general, but it's not part of my conversation. Neither is liability. Any lawyers in the crowd? Right. You did a startup? Right, okay. Liability is a strict legal concept. Right? a lot of people like to use the term accountability, which is also not part of my conversation. I prefer the term responsibility. I kept thinking when I was sitting there listening to David, I've got a t-shirt for that. I've got a t-shirt for that. I have a t-shirt. I went to a conference in Greece just before the Olympics that were in Greece. And I went around, do you know, it was really, really hard to find stuff that didn't have English on it. Right? But I eventually found this t-shirt that's got Socrates playing on Aristotle on it, walking down the Agora. Well, the bad news is Socrates and Aristotle never met. Right? So this was a bit like, but it's a cool t-shirt, right? And I got another one with American Indians on it that I was thinking about when you showed the Lakota things as well. And it says something like, there's these American Indians holding rifles, and it says, fighting terrorism since 1492. I once accidentally wore it to a meeting at ADFA. Also personhood. I don't want to discuss whether or not machines or the algorithms or the like are persons in any sense. Because there is some move in, I think, Saudi Arabia, where they're trying to give legal personhood to some machines. And compliance. There's an organization called the Ethics and Compliance Officers Organization in America. Only in America would they confuse being ethical with being compliant. Okay. The next question is, why does it matter? Right? And there's lots and lots of reasons. I'll give you three. One is about relinquishing control over all kinds of stuff. The next one's about, oh, how did that happen? I must have pressed the button too fast. Is it going to go back? Let's have a look and see if it works. Oh, I went too far. Let's go look technology. We'll go through this thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why does it matter? See if this works now. Have we relinquishing control? And uncritical acceptance. And we'll get to a really important guy on that in a minute. And unintended consequences. I've talked to a lot of IT workers over the last 30-odd years. And the most common phrase I got when I said, why did you do that? Their comment was, I didn't know that was going to happen. Right? If they realize, and if you ask people ahead of time, you put up ethical scenarios, and most people know how to answer them. Right? They go, oh, that's wrong. But then you say, well, how did you get there? And the answer was, they didn't even think about it. They didn't think about it at all. Right? Now, the relation control story is something about how much do we want to be involved in these machines that we delegate bits and pieces to? And you all know, and you're all really deep historians of IT, right? You know that it started out with information gathering and then spitting it back to us. Right? And then it went to some kind of analysis and spitting that back to us. Now we've reached the stage where we not only let it give us information, but we also let it tell us what we ought to do. Or even worse, tell it to go away and do it itself. Right? The Americans, for the longest time, denied the existence of autonomous lethal drones. I had conversations with a couple of guys at Canberra Uni who are in the military, and they said, no, we don't have those things. Nobody has those things. And, about 4 months later, the Americans fess up. Right? So we say, go off, look at stuff, and if you think it's okay, bomb the crap out of it. With no human intervention. And for me, that's kind of the final step and the final worry. There's a novelist, science fiction writer named Jack Williamson, who wrote this story called With Folded Hands. And it's how it was a very utilitarian story about how the machines were designed to take care of us. So whenever there was a risk, it would forbid the humans from taking the risk because they might come to harm. And it encroached and encroached and encroached until everybody was in a cocoon where you were nice and safe. So we become less and less active in these things that have what I see as having moral import. Right? Now, here's an example. A little while back, there was a plane load of children going from Russia to a holiday, and an American air cargo plane. Now, I won't tell you the whole story. It's a long story, and it's got lots of bits to it. The short version is all of the children died. Because the air traffic controller gave instructions to planes on what to do, how to divert, but the automatic software, disaster avoidance software, told it a different story. One of the pilots obeyed the software, one of the pilots obeyed the air traffic controller. The person who killed that one lost his wife and child in the accident. Right? All because somebody deferred to a decision that some software had made. Okay, question number 2 in the quiz. Who said that? And what's the next line? The next line is really crucial. Hey! Brownie points. Alan Turing said this, and he said it when? Almost 70 years ago. But the crucial bit is that he expected us to be able to talk about it with nobody bothering, relinquishing control without anybody being too fussed about it. That's what worried him. I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist, but I don't believe he committed suicide. Now, in the unintended consequences story, you all know that. Okay? Everybody knows that? I thought of putting up a picture of a Terminator, but, it's so passé. There's so many of them. Right? The problem really is let's see if this comes up. It's a bit slow. It worked faster at home. Doing exactly what we ask. Now, if you're interested, there's a website and kind of a TED Talk. And oh, sorry, that went too fast. These are going to be available at some point. Mm-hmm. I've turned it into a PowerPoint presentation. I can't guarantee how it will look when it actually runs. This is okay. Now, to get an idea, and you will all appreciate most of these things. The intrusions of AI, whatever that happens to mean, into our lives is pervasive. It's in all of these fields. I went and had a look. The very first paper I could find about the use of computers in medicine was in classifying electrocardiograms in 1960. And they thought it was a really, really good idea. And probably is, for pattern matching and all that kind of stuff. It's only taken them, 50-odd years to get good at it. I think it was John McCarthy, one of the original godfathers of computing, who predicted about late 1950s. He predicted that within 5 years we would have general-purpose computers that could do the job of any expert. I think he's a bit late. Right? But all of these bits of AI have these kinds of problems. And I'll kind of talk about some of them as we go along. All right? Anybody heard of Microsoft's Tay, the chatbot, right? How it turned into a misogynist racist in a very, very short period of time. And then Microsoft had to yank it off because it wasn't a good look for Microsoft. So we have those kinds of things, right? The problem for us is making sure that these problems don't occur, that the computers get it right, because the consequences are really, really bad for getting it wrong. And we are just kind of dead set famous for getting it wrong a lot. Right? I like the beauty contest judging. How could that go wrong? Right? It turns out that the software that did the judging for the beauty contest preferred white people to black people. Why? That's all the data it had to go on. Historical data is the bedrock of all machine learning.
It already has the bias built in.
The bias is already built into the data. Right? And that comes up a few times as we go along. But I won't kind of talk about too much of the rest of those things because I don't have a lot of time. It says I have 6 minutes left. Oh well. Is that true? I'll keep it. Okay. Oh damn, my thing isn't going to work. There should be a sound bit that's not getting transmitted through here. Oh, that's a real shame. Does anybody know the song Everybody Knows? By Leonard Cohen?
Yeah.
Where the war is over and the good guys lost? Well, when was it made? The song?
10 years ago?
60s?
1988, as it turns out. Oh man, this is so disappointing. Oh well. This one here has a Hank Williams song from 1947, when the song goes, "We live in two different worlds, dear." Right? And when this AI gets smart enough, as anybody heard of that really, really crazy dude Kurzweil? The American. Yeah, he invents, what did he invent? The keyboard synthesizer thing? Yeah. He had all kinds of really crazy ideas about the singularity when AI will surpass us in intelligence and all that kind of stuff. And that's one of the more interesting philosophical questions for us is, what do we do about that if it happens to come true? How do we organize ourselves, and how do we not let them take over? Because that's one of the doomsday predictions, is that it will take over. Okay. Can it be ethical? Can it help us be ethical? And I'm going to talk a little bit about those two things. The answers are no, yes, who knows, and more importantly, complacency and convenience is the best way to destroy a culture. Right? And that's what these things promise to do. Right? What's the good news? Well, a lot of people complain about a lot of human processes, is that there's too much subjectivity, too much human emotion in it. So they claim the good news is it can't care. It's going to be this objective marker for us. The bad news? It can't care. It turns out that caring is one of the most deeply meaningful things that most people experience. That they get to care for somebody else, that somebody else cares for and about them. So AI doesn't score very well on that front. Can AI assist us? Well, there have been some attempts in this front. They can oversee us. There's the so-called ethic quads. And there's something called an ethic toolkit, and a whole lot of people have done a whole lot of work on that, where it could either simply act out our morality, assist us to kind of reflect and see how good ours is. Oh, and I take issue with David's distinction between ethics and morality. Ethics comes from the Greek, morality comes from Latin, and I think they just, I don't care. It's just the same thing.
You AI? Are you AI?
Am I AI? I could be, you know. Be one of the first people to one of the first AIs to actually pass the Turing test. Even though they give out prizes now for modified versions of it, to pass bits of it. Right? Maybe it could stop us from moral lapses, like a little thing that comes up in your watch and says, do you really want to do that? You know, does that conflict with your value system? How many people have one of these? A couple of people. Only a few. I get really annoyed at that activity indicator, telling me what a good boy I've been in getting the right amount of walking or exercising done. If I could turn it off, I would. Or it could carry out social justice, and that's one of the major things I want to talk about. Right? Could ethics assist AI? Could we build in something like a moral Turing test? Right? Is that thing even possible? Well, the short answer is nobody knows right now. Because they're easily deceived. Right? Generally, the amount of reasoning that's put into them is woefully inadequate. Right? And it generates, so far, inferior moral performance. Well, if you want to call it moral performance. Okay? And now, the algorithms are all flavor of the month, right? IT seems to get bored with terms. So they put in a new one for what is really an old package, right? Isn't that, what's that rapid, agile, right? We used to do it, but we called it prototyping. So I'm a bit, okay, another quiz. What's the next line? Extra brownie points if you know what the last line is, and everybody knows where that comes from, right? Right. The next line is, the period was so far like the present, because he was writing about the past. Nothing changes, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about justice and education, right? The use of algorithms to enact justice, right? And the hope is that it can eliminate extraneous factors like what the judge had for lunch, because that might affect, and there's evidence for that kind of stuff. Right? I know that the worst time to give a presentation at a conference is just before lunch, because you're getting in the way of people getting to lunch. Right? The second worst time is just after lunch, when everybody's had a nice lunch, and they just want a nice lie down. Right? So, and it claims to be able to remove strict and lenient sentencing. How many people here work for the government? Just the odd one or two. Hands up, keep your hands up if you believe that your data is high quality, that it's timely and free of errors. the other thing about the justice story, and the historical data has biased, and there's lots of evidence in this in the American Offenders Program, where black people are incarcerated 3 or 4 times the rate. They're more likely to get stopped and all kinds of stuff because of these algorithms that says you are more likely to reoffend. You know, and they get harsher penalties and all that kind of stuff, right? That goes back to my caring story.
Dozens of county and state courts
Oh, this one works.
are trying to move away from an all-cash bail system. Critics say that setup is arbitrary and unfair to poor people. One alternative that's gaining use is a risk assessment algorithm created by a former hedge fund manager. A recent murder case in San Francisco raises questions about its effectiveness. Here are Sarah Westbrook reports.
In the dawn hours of this past July 16, Edward French, film scout and avid photographer, was on Twin Peaks, the famed San Francisco hillside, with its panoramic views of the hometown French loved. As he always did, French had his camera with him. Brian Higginbotham was French's partner. He was in court for a plea hearing in French's murder.
He knew beautiful places. He was trying to catch the sunrise coming up Sunday morning.
That's when, it is alleged, 19-year-old Lamonte Mims and 20-year-old Fantasy DeCour robbed French of his camera and shot him with a handgun. A nearby jogger heard the gunfire, called police, and administered CPR. It was too late. 71-year-old Edward French was soon dead.
I'm still kind of in shock.
Both Mims and DeCour entered not guilty pleas. Lamonte Mims was already on felony probation when police arrested him again this past July 4th, this time for gun possession and parole violations. But San Francisco Superior Court Judge Sharon Reardon released Mims on July 11th. She followed the recommendation of what's called a Public Safety Assessment, or PSA score, a computer-generated score that's now used here and in many other cities to help calculate whether a suspect is a flight risk or is likely to return to court. French's partner, Brian Higginbotham, calls Judge Reardon's decision insane.
I mean, he's violated 2 probations. He was a convicted felon, and he had a gun charge just 5 days before the murder of Ed French. It's absolutely crazy.
This is 99% Invisible. I'm Roman Morse.
I said there were
On
2
April
witnesses.
9th, 2017, United Airlines Flight 3411 was about to fly from Chicago to Louisville when flight attendants discovered the plane was overbooked. They tried to get volunteers to give up their seats with promises of travel vouchers and hotel accommodations, but not enough people were willing to get off. United ended up calling some airport security officers. They boarded the plane and forcibly removed a passenger named Dr. David Dow. The officers ripped Dow out of his seat and carried him down the aisle of the airplane, nose bleeding, while horrified onlookers shot video with their phones. You probably remember this incident and the outrage it generated.
The international uproar continued over the forced removal of a passenger from a United Airlines flight. Today, the airline's CEO, Oscar Munoz, issued an apology, saying, quote, "No one should ever be mistreated this way. I want you to know that we take full responsibility."
But why Dr. Dow? How did he end up being the unlucky passenger that United decided to remove? Immediately following the incident, some people thought racial discrimination may have played a part, and it's possible that this played a role in how he was treated. But the answer to how he was chosen was actually an algorithm, a computer program. It crunched through a bunch of data, looking at stuff like how much each passenger had paid for their ticket, what time they checked in, how often they flew on United, and whether they were part of a rewards program. The algorithm likely determined that Dr. Dow was one of the least valuable customers on.
Okay. This is the story of 2 algorithms, one of which measured a teacher's performance, and this poor woman was sacked because she didn't go according to prediction. Right? These people are suing. Yeah, it's so much fun making fun of Americans. They had this EVAS system. Right? Now, here's where it kind of gets interesting. The algorithm started out measuring the value of strawberries. And they thought, oh, we can use this for education. It'll be cool and groovy. This one is more disturbing. You all know who SAS is? Everybody in the room knows who SAS is. I didn't think I needed to explain that. Trade secrets. They wouldn't tell the education department nor the teachers how they worked. Right? And further, that if the teachers tried to reconstruct their scores, they would necessarily fail because they didn't have important information in the algorithms. Okay, how many people, anybody here who knows who that is? Anybody got grandchildren or small children?
Shaun the Sheep.
Hey, Shaun the Sheep. Right in the middle of every Shaun the Sheep book, it says, what's a sheep to do? He gets himself into this muddle. There seems to be an intractable problem, and then he solves it, and everything is kind of cool and groovy. So, as IT professionals, what are you going to do? Right? Once again, the music didn't come up. Okay, who sang A World of Our Own? Hey, all these people with grayish hair. And some people who used to have more hair than they do. When was it done?
63.
Close, 65. Okay, we're nearly done here. So, what I propose is that you design good, i.e. moral, ethical, algorithms. And that means ensuring, there's a lot of story about the opaqueness of these black box algorithms, right? Ensure that it's falsifiable, like any good scientist. Ensure that you can evaluate it. This is the tough one, of course. People have learned how to game algorithms, right? The ones in particular are Google algorithms to get more clicks and more hits, right? They're techniques that people, it's called Google bombing, where you can get your page up higher in the list, right? How do you know that the logic is anything like reasonable? Right? And there's a good many things that we just can't measure, and the question is, what are the limits of systems for that? Are they verifiable? Oh, there's that damn story again about data. Man, it's a real bother. What's the long tail? Anybody here own an autonomous vehicle? Not yet? Who wants to own one? I mean, it saves all that bother of traffic. Right? You just sit in the back. They're also known, in human terms, they're known as chauffeurs. There is in philosophy circles something known as the trolley problem. And it's generated an entire industry in philosophy called trolleyology. Whatever. Philosophers got great names for stuff. Right? The story is you're on a trolley and it's barreling down the tracks, and if you don't do something, it's going to kill 5 people. But you notice you can steer off onto a sidetrack, which would kill 1 person. What do you do? Right? That's kind of the whole thing. And there's some fancy versions, and there's one where you're standing on a bridge, overlooking it, and you can see what's happening. And there's a fat guy next to you. So is that politically incorrect? Is it under height for weight? That's what a nurse once. A nurse once described our daughter when she was really, really little as being under height for weight. And you know that if you push the fat man off the bridge, he'll land in front of the trolley and stop it. Still only 1 person dies. Would you push the fat man? Right? There's books and books written about it. Now, what that's a sign of is that up until last year, the trolley problem had never actually existed in real life. It was developed by a woman called Philippa Foot, a philosopher. And it never actually existed. Right? So people go, oh, what's the word? Well, it actually existed. It actually happened in San Francisco. where this woman was on the train. So now we have to worry about that. But it's a very, very small probability problem. Do you worry about just going for the big problems, like making sure it travels according to the speed limit, doesn't bump into any other cars? Or do you go after this thing has happened once? How many millions or billions of miles of traffic are there every year? Right? Really low probability event. Should we devote a lot of time to covering those things? Or should we just worry about the big issues? Making sure it gets us there on time? We don't know. Oh man, this was going to be so good. None of the music ones came out, but the sound one did. Okay, you all know what it is, right? Okay. And it kind of goes down. Anybody know anything about that sculpture? It's actually a real sculpture by a New Zealand dude. It's called Diminish and Ascend. This one, he actually has installed the thing in a couple of places. Once at Bondi. Right? Oh, I apologize for this, folks. Okay. This thing says, the computer has assured us that nothing is wrong. Everything will return to normal. Right? And then it goes on to say, well, except for this one little thing. Right? So my story about ethics in AI is, think about it. Think about it ahead of time. Most of the time, we can overcome a lot of our problems if we simply think about the consequences, think about who's being impacted, think about rights and duties and all that kind of stuff. And I was so glad you didn't mention utilitarianism or deontology. That just kind of would have pre-messaged a whole lot of stuff. So, if you're going to do algorithms, if you're going to do this AI story, think about it ahead of time. Thank you. We're back to where we started.
Are there any questions for Richard? We're happy to take your questions if there are any.
No?
Okay. No worries. We are going to have a 5 to 10 minutes break until we can prepare our panel, which is the next part of the session. So there's more food and help yourselves and until we prepare.
Yeah.